Namaskar, I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. Welcome to Newsnight. Amidst concern over vulnerability of children to COVID infection, detailed guidelines have been released by the government to manage COVID cases among younger population. Meanwhile, powerful nations of the G7 are congregating in United Kingdom for a decisive strategy to tackle pandemic globally. India is also invited as a guest nation. We'll also talk about in the show up ahead the progress of monsoon and the heartbreaking news passing away of legendary boxer Dinko Singh. All that and more. First, the headlines. Union Health Ministry issues detailed guidelines for management of coronavirus among children. Guidelines do not recommend use of antiviral drug remdesivir. Use of steroid drugs under strict surveillance only for patients with severe to extremely severe cases. Review meeting to track progress in vaccination drive takes place. Meeting chaired by Union Health Secretary recommends states to prioritize second dose for frontline workers. Health Ministry issues clarification on advisory to states and union territories to not share even system data on vaccine stocks and temperature of vaccine storage on public forums without prior consent. Says the objective is to stop unfair commercial exploitation of the data. India reports less than 1 lakh daily COVID cases for third consecutive day. Active cases fall to 11.68 lakh. Recovery rate climbs to 94.77%. Number of vaccine doses administered crosses 24 crore mark. Ministry of Education releases All India Survey of Higher Education Report 2019-20. Data shows 11.4% growth in student enrollment. Female students comprise nearly 49% of the total enrollment. Eleven people die as residential building collapses in Malad West in Mumbai. Prime Minister expresses condolences over loss of lives. Announces ex gratia of rupees 2 lakh each for next of kin of those who've lost their lives and 50,000 rupees to those injured. Prime Minister Narendra Modi to participate in G-7 outreach sessions on June 12th and 13th virtually at invitation of UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. British PM says G7 summit is a chance to show the world our values of openness, freedom, democracy and free trade. Asian Games gold medal winner boxer Dinko Singh passes away at the age of 42 due to long battle with liver cancer. President, Prime Minister express grief over demise of the legendary boxer. And the biggest football extravaganza all set to begin. By Friday, Euro 2020 to kick off a month full of high-octane soccer action for football fans across the globe. Soccer giants from Europe to compete for the trophy. Now, use of popular COVID drug like remdesivir is not recommended for children. Children of age 5 years and below should not wear masks. 6-minute walk test to gauge lung capacity and infection. Now, these are some of the many recommendations announced to effectively manage COVID infections among youngsters below the age of 18 years. While vaccine for this age group is still under trial, COVID-appropriate behavior continues to remain the most crucial. Here's more on what the guidelines say.
Government has released comprehensive guidelines for management of COVID-19 in children. There is no recommendation for popular medication for youngsters. Prompt CT scan is also not advisable. According to these fresh guidelines, usage of steroids in treating asymptomatic and mild cases of infection among children is harmful. Let's take a closer look at what the guidelines for children say. Can steroids be used for children? Steroid use is indicated only in hospitalized, moderately severe and critically ill COVID-19 cases under strict supervision. Steroids should be used at the right time, in right dose and for the right duration. Self-medication of steroids must be avoided. Can remdesivir be administered to children? Remdesivir is an emergency use authorization drug and is not recommended in children. Should children wear masks? Children aged 5 years and under should not be required to wear masks. Do children need to undergo CT scan? Guidelines say that high-resolution CT, that is HRCT scan, of chest provides better visualization of the extent and nature of lung involvement in patients with COVID-19. Treating pediatricians should exercise caution while advising HRCT imaging of the chest. Guidelines make it clear that COVID-19 is a viral infection and antimicrobials have no role in prevention or treatment of uncomplicated COVID-19 infection. Antimicrobials should not be prescribed unless there is a clinical suspicion of a super-added infection. Children who are COVID positive but asymptomatic have not been prescribed any medication in the guidelines. They are advised to maintain hydration and a nutritious diet. For those children with mild symptoms of fever and cough, paracetamol 10 to 15 mg per kg per dose is recommended. It may be repeated every 4 to 6 hours. Throat-soothing agents and warm saline gargles in older children and adolescents is recommended. For moderate to severe symptoms, it is recommended to initiate oxygen therapy immediately. Corticosteroids are not required in all children with moderate illness. They may be administered in rapidly progressive disease.
गाइडलाइंस हमेशा बेनिफिट करती हैं, बट इंडियन एकेडमी ऑफ पीडियाट्रिक्स ऑलरेडी लास्ट ईयर ही क्लियर कट गाइडलाइंस इशू कर चुका है कि कब स्टेरॉइड करना है, कब नहीं यूज करना है. दूसरी बात ये, पीडियाट्रिक पॉपुलेशन में जो मेजर प्रॉब्लम एक्यूट कोविड नहीं होती वो MIS-C होती है, तो इस गाइडलाइन में MIS-C पे भी टच किया है. और MIS की जो गाइडलाइन है उसमें जो यूज ऑफ स्टेरॉइड है वो कहीं ज्यादा होता है एज कम्पेयर टू एक्यूट कोविड.
In case of severe COVID infection among children, the guidelines say if acute respiratory syndrome develops, it must be treated accordingly. 6-minute walk test is also recommended to assess cardiopulmonary exercise tolerance and is used to unmask hypoxia among children. It is to be used in children above 12 years under supervision of parents or guardian. It is a simple clinical test. Attach pulse oximeter to finger of the child and ask the child to walk in the confines of their room for 6 minutes continuously. Observe the readings to determine next course of action. Focus of the guidelines is that right measures be taken on time in case of COVID amongst youngsters. Bureau Report, DD India.
And let's look at the COVID data from across the country. India reports less than 1 lakh daily COVID cases for third consecutive day. The active cases have also fallen to 11.68 lakh. Recovery rate has climbed to 94.77%. The number of vaccine doses administered crossed the 24 crore mark. Meanwhile, states and union territories have been asked to sharpen their focus and prepare for effective plans for expediting second dose administration for healthcare workers and other frontline workers. And here are the updates from across the states as well.
The steady decrease in fresh cases of COVID-19 continues. On Thursday, for the third consecutive day, less than 1 lakh new cases were registered across the country. India has reported 94,052 daily new cases in the last 24 hours. Daily positivity rate stands at 4.69%. India's active caseload further declines to less than 12 lakh after 60 days. Recovery rate increases to 94.77%. The cumulative number of COVID-19 vaccine doses administered in the country has exceeded 24 crores. 33,79,261 vaccine doses were administered in the last 24 hours. Union Health Secretary Rajesh Bhushan chaired a high-level meeting with the states and UTs. The progress of vaccination was reviewed in the light of the revised guidelines for implementation of National COVID Vaccination Program and recent advisories. States were also informed of the modifications of CoWIN platform aimed to make it more effective as a back-end management tool for the countrywide vaccination drive. States and UTs were asked to sharpen their focus and prepare effective plans for expediting the second dose administration for the healthcare workers and frontline workers. The Secretary highlighted less than adequate private sector participation in the COVID vaccination drive in states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, Odisha, West Bengal, Assam, etc. States were alerted to the new features in CoWIN portal which were incorporated in light of the new vaccination guidelines. States were also informed of the vaccine utilization feature that allows editing and updating the vaccine utilization reports submitted by the vaccinators, and that the CoWIN platform is now available in 12 languages. Meanwhile, Government of India reiterated its commitment to transparency in COVID-19 vaccination program via a real-time IT-based tracking of vaccine logistics up to beneficiaries through CoWIN. The aim is to share the information with the general public on a regular basis. It has asked states and UTs to obtain permission before sharing the e-win data and analytics related to vaccine stocks and the temperature at which they are stored, solely to prevent any misuse of this data by various agencies for commercial purposes. The crucial information related to specific vaccine usage trends for multiple vaccines used in universal immunization program and temperature-related data in respect to each such vaccine can be used to manipulate the market as well as associated research with respect to various vaccines and cold chain equipment. In Bihar, the State Health Department has amended the death toll due to coronavirus infection. After the amendment, the death toll from the epidemic in the state has now risen to 9,429. Delhi government has also cancelled exams for class 9th and 11th. Union Minister Mukhtar Abbas Naqvi said that a countrywide campaign will be launched soon against the rumours and confusion regarding the ongoing vaccination in the country. Information and Broadcasting Minister Prakash Javadekar inaugurated an oxygen plant set up at V.K. Patil Foundation Hospital in Ahmednagar, Maharashtra. It has a capacity of producing 500 litres of liquid medical oxygen per minute. The minister said that during the corona era, it became clear that even after 65 years of independence, hospitals did not have systems in place to produce oxygen. To correct this, Prime Minister approved the setting up of 1,200 oxygen generation plants in various government hospitals across the country through PM Cares.
मुझे खुशी है महाराष्ट्र में विखे पाटिल फाउंडेशन का जो हॉस्पिटल है नगर में, उन्होंने खुद एक प्लांट लगाया है जो प्रति मिनट 500 लीटर ऑक्सीजन देगा, और ये एक अच्छी शुरुआत है। सभी निजी अस्पताल भी अपना अपना ऑक्सीजन प्लांट लगाएंगे और देश में ये मुझे विश्वास है कि ऐसा संकट फिर नहीं आएगा।
In Assam, Chief Minister Himant Biswa Sarma inaugurated a 300-bedded COVID care hospital in Guwahati, constructed in 20 days at a cost of rupees 21 crores 46 lakhs. The hospital was built with help from DRDO and handed over to the state government.
From today, with addition of 300 beds in this DRDO hospital, or in short NXC hospital of Guwahati Medical College, we will be able to expand COVID treatment to a large extent.
It will act as an annex to Guwahati Medical College and Hospital. Set up in an area of 3,200 square meters, the hospital has 200 beds in general ward with oxygen facility and 100 ICU beds. It also has an X-ray room, pharmacy, ultrasound and ECG room and laboratory. Bureau Report, DD India.
And while the second wave of pandemic subsides and vulnerability of younger population to COVID is being deliberated in India and the world, the first in-person global summit since the COVID pandemic hit is taking place this week. United Kingdom is hosting the G-7 summit. India and other developing countries are invited to participate. The core agenda is to foster decisive partnership to tackle the pandemic and boost vaccine distribution. Other critical issues such as climate change will also take center stage.
As the leaders of the G7 begin to arrive at the southwestern tip of the United Kingdom, the town is giving them a welcome of its own. From sculptures with a message to a song that is so native to this part of the world. The sculpture, nicknamed Mount Recycle More, of the leaders of the G7 out of the electronic waste, have also appeared on the side of the Cornish coast in trash. That is an attempt by the artists to highlight the huge amount of technology and gadgets that goes unrecycled globally each year. On the other hand, strolling down the Prince of Wales Pier in Falmouth,
now the mainsail sets, call for the captain ashore, let me go home.
A local sea shanty group is busy with a rendition of the traditional Cornish song La Marna ahead of the summit. But songs and sculptures apart, the G7 meeting is one of the most anticipated meeting of the head of states of most powerful nations in person ever since the COVID-19 pandemic engulfed the world. US President Joe Biden arrived in the United Kingdom on Wednesday. He and his counterparts will gather in the picturesque seaside town of Carbis Bay for face-to-face meetings. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's article ahead of the G7 summit throws some light on the likely issues that will dominate the talks, including the pandemic. UK Prime Minister Johnson has said that G7 will be a crucial moment for the world. It is for the first time that the leaders of the world's richest and the most powerful democracies have had the chance to meet in person since the pandemic began 18 months ago, and it could not have come at a better time. This is the moment for the world's greatest and the most technologically advanced democracies to shoulder their responsibilities and to vaccinate the world, because no one can be properly protected until everyone has been protected. The G7 will pledge to distribute vaccines to inoculate the world by the end of next year. G7 leaders will begin the framing of a new global treaty on pandemic preparedness so the world is never caught out in the same way again. G7 leaders will be joined by friends, the leaders of India, South Korea, Australia and South Africa. The leaders will work together to tackle the world's biggest problems, including reducing carbon emissions and fighting the loss of biodiversity.
I think that this is an amazing opportunity for the world. It's a big moment. Don't forget, this is the first time in 6 months in office almost that Joe Biden, the US president, has been able to come overseas for a major trip. It's the first time any of us really have been able to see each other face to face since the pandemic began. So here at the G7, what we're looking at is making sure that we have a new treaty on pandemics.
Other issues also may take some attention at the summit. EU institution leaders will tell British Prime Minister Boris Johnson that Britain and the EU had both agreed the protocol governing Northern Ireland trade arrangements and that Britain must apply it and not make unilateral changes. Security for the G7 has been tightened in the English seaside resort of Carbis Bay and the nearby town of St. Ives. Police have closed off roads and coastal paths to Carbis Bay, erecting steel fences and putting other restrictions in place. The summit meeting also comes at a time when India is continuously engaging with the world leaders in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, among other issues. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will attend the meeting virtually and India will press for a patent waiver on COVID vaccine, among other things.
The invitation of UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi will participate in the outreach sessions of the G7 summit on 12th and 13th June in virtual format. The meeting will be held in hybrid mode. The theme for this summit is Build Back Better, and the UK has outlined 4 priority areas for its presidency. This is the second time that the Prime Minister will be participating in this G7 meeting.
India will also voice its concern on the issue of vaccine passport and the issue of greater access to vaccines for the developing world. The Group of 7 or G7 is made up of the world's 7 largest influential societies and advanced economies. The group includes the UK, the USA, Canada, Japan, Germany, France and Italy. Every year, different countries are invited to partake in the summit as guests. This year, UK has invited leaders from Australia, India, South Korea and South Africa to attend. Bureau Report, DD India.
That brings us to the issue in focus this evening. We're talking about G7 global partnerships for critical issues. And 2 eminent guests are joining me for this conversation. Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti, former Secretary MEA, and Professor Harsh Vardhan Pant, Distinguished Fellow ORF, that's Observer Research Foundation. Good evening and welcome, gentlemen, to Newsnight. Mr. Chakravarti, if I can begin with you. Now, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson echoes a common wisdom. He says no one can be properly protected unless everyone is protected. If you look at the influence and potential of the G7 countries, how do you see that goal achievable? Pinak sir, I hope I'm audible to you. If you could respond to that first. All right, we're trying to connect to our guest Pinak Ranjan Chakrabarti.
Sorry, there was a bit
so
of,
could you hear me, sir? If you could respond to that.
Yeah, I couldn't hear the last part. Can you repeat that, please?
Right, just trying to understand, sir, that the influence and potential of the G7 member countries to be able to effectively tackle the COVID challenge. How do you see that coming around?
Well, one thing is that many of the vaccines are produced in these countries, and particularly the USA. We are in fact using the AstraZeneca, which was produced in the UK. Now, the question is that India will be pushing for the waiver of IPR, that is the patent for the vaccine, so that many more companies can start producing and we can get more and more supplies into the market and into the hands of countries, or into the hands of and into countries which have not received the adequate number. I think, as you know, the statistics say that over 60% of the vaccines have been used up by USA, India, and China. So I think this is a very important point, and these countries are in a position to influence the debate on the IPR waiver. Of course, there are lobbies, etc., of the companies, the pharma companies themselves, who don't want this waiver because they stand to gain a lot, billions actually, in these kinds of situation, the pandemic situation that we have. And they can sell their vaccines at higher costs if there is no waiver, because more producers means more supply, which means that more the cost per vaccine goes down per dose. So I think this is a very important issue. Healthcare and health pandemic will be an important issue in this summit. And I hope they take this decision. And India will certainly be pushing for an IPR waiver. But I think some of the European countries are reluctant, although President Biden has supported it. But let's see what happens finally, what they do. And this is something that will be very important. And the world is waiting to see how these leaders act, whether they are parochial and inward-looking, and they look at the profits of their own pharma companies, or they look at the global sort of situation and the health situation all over the world. I think these countries also, some of these countries also take a very high degree of issue around the rhetoric on human rights.
Right.
But I think the human rights of the people of the world are also important. So let them not speak of human rights if they cannot give the IPR waiver.
Right. And Professor Pant, when G7 pledges to distribute vaccination and seeks to inoculate the world by the end of next year, the method and the pace is going to be crucial.
Yes, absolutely. I think what this summit will perhaps decide is whether the world is has the possibility of coming together at this time of grave health crisis. And we have seen time and time again that things are said, but they are never operationalized. Things are said, but they are never acted upon. So I think as Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, was suggesting, that it's imperative for the G7 and plus 4 countries who will be there as outreach members of this platform to give out a clear signal that they believe not simply in their own vaccination, emphasis on their own vaccination policies, but also what can be done about the equity and access to vaccination across the world, because clearly the pandemic has shown us very categorically that we cannot win this battle if a large part of the world does not really have access to medical facilities and vaccines in this particular case. So my sense is that this is going to be high on the agenda, and this is perhaps the most important issue on the agenda for G7. And I'm, my sense is that they certainly would be making a very important concerted effort to correct the impression which has been now created because of their own behavior over the last few months, that the developed world has first taken its own, has taken steps primarily to inoculate itself rather than the rest of the world.
Right.
And now that the challenge is becoming more and more unmanageable, given its given in its outbreak in various parts of the world, the second strain, and so on and so forth, the clear indication from WHO is that more and more people across the world will have to be vaccinated if at all we are looking for a reasonable possibility of life becoming back to normal in any part of the world.
Right.
So I think that is something that message will go out from G7.
Right, and on that note, Professor Pant, how does the concerns that India has raised about opposing vaccine passport and also supporting the vaccine patent waiver, how does it echo the needs of the developing world? Because we are also looking at a congregation of advanced economies at G7.
Yes, see, India has been from the very beginning very categorical on this. And if you recall, even when during the first wave, when the crisis was really, relatively moderate as far as India was concerned, and India was managing it very well, it was even at that time India was saying that, look, we have to fight this together. And therefore, access to medicines, access to pharmaceutical industry, access to vaccines is going to be very important for the rest of the world if we are to win this battle. So I think India's position has been defined by a certain kind of a normative consensus from the very beginning. And that is something that India will certainly push at this G7 as well, where India has been invited, and perhaps rightly so, given that you cannot really take on this challenge without India's participation. And what India has done has taken this cause at multiple levels. Individually, India has supplied to the best extent possible from its own inventory, vaccines, medicine facilities, etc. India has during the first wave. During the second wave, it has worked bilaterally with countries to push its case, and multilaterally India has been saying that, look, WTO along with South Africa, India's proposal for a waiver on intellectual property has been something that is now gaining traction, and we know that that WTO has allowed now for the possibility of negotiations to begin, and a large number of countries are with India on this. So I think India has been able to mobilize world opinion on this issue, and my sense would be that it will carry the day in G7 at Cornwall as well.
Right. Mr. Chakrabarti, in the rapidly transforming world order, one often debates over the significance, the relevance of a grouping like G7, but the member countries that have been invited as guests, India, for instance, also South Korea, Australia and South Africa, what kind of energy do they bring into a summit like this, representing the free democratic world outside?
I think they are reaching out to countries with whom they think they can do business with, or they think alike. For example, China certainly is going to become one of the largest economies in the world, but China is not in G7. Even if China you can consider as #2 economic power. So I think it is not pure economics. I think there is a geopolitical dimension to all this. And I think if you look at what they have been saying, that the geopolitical dimension also includes the fact of China's rise and how they are going to deal with it. So I think India is part of the Quad now. So I think India is more or less seen as a quasi ally or something of the West. So I think this is something that we have to take note of. And there is no doubt that on the healthcare front, if India is not part of it, because we are one of the largest producers of vaccines. So I don't think the world is going to recover economically. And basically, if it's going to be a economic-driven revival of the economy, I mean, that's going to drive the consensus in G7. But I think India has to be a part of it, because healthcare, if you don't improve healthcare, nothing improves. If you don't vaccinate the globe, nothing starts, in the sense that the whole tourism, aviation, and all these industries will get into a slump, and these employ a lot of people. I mean, employment is hit very hard.
Right.
So I think it's very important for India to be part of it because of these reasons.
Right. Professor Pant, move on to another of the critical issues that G7 is expected to deliberate upon is climate change. Now, G7 countries also represent some of the biggest companies, corporates in the world. And one of the disturbing studies that came in was that none of the G7 leading stock indices aligned with the Paris climate goals. In the sense, are the companies, individual big conglomerates doing enough to check climate change damage? And in fact, the study says that if they continue the manner they are, the temperature rise could be way above what was agreed upon in the climate meet. So in that sort of a context, when the most advanced countries, in fact, are not able to meet the Paris climate deadlines, what direction are we headed?
Yes, I think the tables have been turned on this issue, because for a long time we heard India in particular used to be the target of a lot of rhetoric from the West on this question, that look, climate change is a big issue, India is not doing enough, India should be doing more. And I think with its own actions, and primarily because, as Prime Minister has often stated this point, which is very, I think, important and interesting to underline, that it is in India's interest to get its climate act in order. It is not because someone else is telling us to do it, but because of our own cultural ethos, civilizational ethos, as well as the requirements of 21st century, that India needs to get its environmental record in order. And we have done that. If you look at the kind of parameters that we have set with the Paris Climate Accord commitments, we have moved far beyond in some cases. So clearly, India is on track insofar as its own commitments are concerned, and India is doing it because it recognizes the need to do it, both from its that arise out of India's own questions about its own requirements insofar as ordinary Indians are concerned. But I think now that the question is how far the developed world is going to go in its in this endeavor, because that's the challenge beyond health. It's the crisis of economic revival that is at stake. And many Western countries today are in a position where they are saying, look, we can worry about climate tomorrow. Today, it's the issue of economic recovery. So I think that question will be front and foremost at Cornwall. And my sense is perhaps they're going to come up with a strong statement. But again, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And we won't know the outcome until these commitments are embodied in national legislatures. And as you were pointing out, whether the big companies in these countries, in the developed world, are willing to abide by the commitments signed on to by these member states. And I think that will be the real challenge.
Right. On that note, Professor Pant, Mr. Chakravarti, thanks very much for joining us on Newsnight and sharing your perspective. Some grim news coming from Maharashtra. 11 people lost their lives after a residential building collapse at the new collector compound, Malad West, in Mumbai. On Wednesday night, President Ramnath Kovind, Prime Minister Modi condoled the loss of lives due to the structure collapse. In Mumbai, Prime Minister announced an ex gratia of 2 lakh rupees each from PM National Relief Fund for the next of kin of those who lost their lives due to the accident and Malad's Malwani area.
After the first day of monsoon rains caused by waterlogging and long traffic snarls in Mumbai, monsoon misery continues for the city. Tragedy unfolded in Malad West, where a portion of the second and third floors of a 3-story building collapsed on the adjacent 1-story hut Wednesday night, killing 11 people. Dozens of rescuers were engaged in clearing the debris on Thursday. Following the incident, residents from 3 nearby buildings were also evacuated as a precautionary measure. According to the BMC, the building was in a dilapidated condition and hence could not withstand the heavy rains. The Mumbai police has decided to register a case against the owner of the building and the contractor under section 304(2) of the IPC, that is culpable homicide not amounting to murder.
अनफॉर्चुनेट इंसिडेंट है। कल रात को 11:15 साढ़े 11 के करीबन ये इंसिडेंट यहाँ हुआ है। एक ग्राउंड प्लस 2 की एक इमारत थी, वो जो गिर गई है, वो गिरते समय वो सामने वाली बिल्डिंग पे गिर गई। उसमें कल रात से 18 लोगों को रेस्क्यू किया गया वहाँ से। उसमें से अभी तो सुबह तक 11 लोगों की मौत हो गई है।
President Ramnath Kovind and Prime Minister Narendra Modi have condoled the loss of lives due to the structure collapse in Malad West, Mumbai. The Prime Minister announced an ex gratia of 2 lakh rupees each from the Prime Minister's National Relief Fund for the next of kin of those who lost their lives. A sum of 50,000 rupees was also announced for those injured. Maharashtra Chief Minister Uddhav Thackeray also announced help of 5 lakh rupees each for the next of kin of the victims Meanwhile, BJP's Ram Kadam hit out at the Shiv Sena over the Mumbai building collapse, which has resulted in 11 deaths so far. The intensity of rain decreased in Mumbai on Thursday. Thane and Palghar have been receiving light to moderate rains since Wednesday night. In Ratnagiri, curfew will be imposed on Friday and Saturday following IMD's warning. Fishermen have been asked not to venture out in the sea. The Met Office has also warned of heavy rains in all the districts of Konkan, including Mumbai, till Saturday. Meanwhile, the NDRF has deployed 15 teams in Thane, Raigad, Palghar, Ratnagiri, Mumbai and Sindhudurg districts.
After consultation with the state government and district administration, NDRF has deployed 15 teams in the coastal districts of Maharashtra, in which 2 teams each are in Palghar, Thane, Sindhudurg and Raigad, whereas 3 teams are in Mumbai and 4 teams are in Sindhudurg.
Being its best season, the monsoon brings cheer to the maximum city, but the excessive downpour, coupled with unsafe buildings, proved to be a death trap which has been a niggling problem for India's financial capital for years now. Bureau Report, DD India.
The Ministry of Education on Thursday released the latest edition of All India Survey on Higher Education 2019-20. Key features of All India Survey of this report 2019-20. The total enrollment in higher education stands at 3.85 crore in 2019-20 as compared to 3.74 crore in 2018-19. That's the previous year. Gross enrollment ratio, the percentage of students belonging to the eligible age group enrolled in higher education in 2019-20 is 27.1% against 26.3% in 2018-19. Gender parity index in higher education in 2019-20 is 1.01 as against 1.00 in 2018-19, indicating an improvement in the relative access to higher education for females. Pupil-teacher ratio in higher education in 2019-20 is 26. 3.38 crore students enrolled in programs at undergraduate and postgraduate levels. Some more update on the weather front. Monsoon is likely to advance into the remaining parts of Maharashtra, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, West Bengal, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, parts of Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh and East Uttar Pradesh in the next 2 to 3 days. Here's an update.
Southwest monsoon continues its march in the country. On Thursday, it further advanced into some more parts of South Gujarat region, remaining parts of Maharashtra, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. It also covered parts of South Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, South Odisha, remaining parts of Central Bay of Bengal and most parts of North Bay of Bengal. According to India Meteorological Department, conditions are favourable for further advance of monsoon into some more parts of Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, remaining parts of Chhattisgarh and Odisha, entire West Bengal and Jharkhand, and some more parts of Bihar and East Uttar Pradesh, and remaining parts of North Bay of Bengal during the next 48 hours. Most of the districts in Maharashtra are in the orange zone, Raigad and Ratnagiri in red zone. They are likely to receive extremely heavy rainfall in the coming days. Monsoon has covered the entire Maharashtra, including Vidarbha. In the coming days, Konkan is likely to receive heavy to very heavy rainfall.
और अगले 4 से 5 दिनों में इंटेंसिटी बारिश का मुंबई में भी बढ़ सकता है। कोंकण के कुछ इलाकों में हम लोगों ने ऑरेंज अलर्ट जारी किया है, साथ में कुछ इलाकों में जहाँ पे एक्सट्रीमली हेवी रेनफॉल होने की संभावना है, जैसे रायगढ़, रत्नागिरी है। इन जिलों के लिए रेड अलर्ट भी जारी कर दिया गया, लेकिन वो आज के लिए नहीं, अगले कुछ आने वाले 4 से 5 दिनों के लिए है। उसका सब डिटेल्स वेबसाइट पे है, वो कृपया देखें।
As per IMD, with the strengthening of westerly winds along the west coast in association with low pressure area, widespread rainfall activity with heavy to very heavy falls likely to continue over coastal districts of Maharashtra from 10th to 15th of June and likely over coastal Karnataka from 12th to 15th of June this year. Isolated extremely heavy falls very likely over Konkan from 12th to 15th of June. Heat wave conditions very likely in isolated pockets over South Haryana on 10th of June and over northwest Rajasthan on 10th and 11th of June. Bureau Report, DD India.
Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath called on Union Home Minister Amit Shah in New Delhi. Yogi's visit to Delhi assumes significance as Uttar Pradesh Assembly elections are scheduled to be held next year. Bengali filmmaker Buddhadev Dasgupta has died in Kolkata of age-related complications. The director was 77 years old. He was suffering from kidney ailment. 5 films of Buddhadev Dasgupta received national awards in the best feature film categories. Delhi High Court on Thursday refused to stay the release of the film Nyay, the Justice, which is allegedly based on the death of Bollywood actor Sushant Singh Rajput. The court dismissed the plea filed by Sushant's father, K.K. Singh, who sought a stay on several films being made on the late actor's life. Some of the upcoming or proposed film projects mentioned in the plea include Nyay, the Justice, Suicide or Murder, A Star Was Lost, Shashank, and an unnamed crowd-funded film as well. Fugitive Indian jeweler and PNB loan fraud scam accused Mehul Choksi has been declared a prohibited immigrant in Dominica. The new twist in Mehul Choksi's case is likely to boost India's efforts to deport him back to the country to face trial in the PNB scam case. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar called on Kuwait Prime Minister Sheikh Sabah Khalid Al Hamad Al Sabah on Thursday and appreciated his commitment to taking partnership between the two countries to greater levels. Dr. Jaishankar also conveyed India's felicitations to Kuwait on the 60th anniversary of bilateral diplomatic relations. During the visit, he held productive discussions with Foreign Minister of the State of Kuwait, Dr. Ahmed Nasser Mohammad Al Sabah. An MOU to give Indian workers greater legal protection was also signed. The minister also appreciated presence of the Commerce Minister, Dr. Abdullah Isa Al Salman, during the talks. Dr. Jaishankar also said that India-Kuwait historical ties have been reinforced through our joint fight against COVID pandemic. Kuwait has been supporting India in dealing with coronavirus pandemic by supplying relief material as well as medical oxygen. Minister for Minority Affairs Mukhtar Abbas Naqvi has said that Indian government will abide by the Saudi Arabia's decision on conducting Hajj 2021, stating that the government's priority continues to be health and well-being of people of both the nations and also of humanity. Naqvi said India is doing its preparations, including vaccinations of pilgrims. He was speaking after chairing a review meeting regarding Hajj 2021 in Mumbai that was virtually attended by India's ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Dr. Asaf Saeed, Consul General of India in Jeddah, Shahid Alam, and other senior officials. And some sports update, often called mini FIFA World Cup. Euro Cup is all set to amaze football fans across the world from Friday. For the first match of the championship, Italy and Turkey will be taking on one another at Olimpico Stadium in Rome. The tournament will go on for a month, in which 24 teams from Europe will face one another to become the champion of 2021. The tournament was delayed for a year due to the pandemic. One of the biggest football extravaganza is set to unroll in Europe from Friday. After a long drought of action, fans will finally get to see professional football action on the ground. The Euro Cup, known as European Championship, is all set to begin from 11th of June. For the next 1 month, European football giants including Spain, England, France, Croatia will be competing for the coveted trophy. The Euro Cup was first organized in the year 1960 and since then is played after every 4 years. But this time it is different. It is for the first time that Eurocup is being hosted together by 11 countries. A total of 24 teams are participating in this month-long championship tournament. Teams have been divided into 6 groups comprising 4 teams each. Germany and Spain have won the cup 3 times each, which is the highest number of wins for a single country. Quarter-finals will be played from 2nd of July. Semi-finals will be played on 7th and 8th of July. Finals will be played on 11th of July at London's Wembley Stadium. Only 10 teams have been able to win the previous 15 editions of the European Championship. While Germany and Spain have won the title 3 times, France has taken home the cup twice. The tournament was scheduled to be played after 2020 but was delayed by a year due to COVID pandemic. Sports Desk, DD India. Legendary boxer Dinko Singh passed away on Thursday after a long battle with liver cancer. He was 42 years old and had been fighting the disease since 2017. Singh won the gold medal in 1998 Bangkok Asian Games in the bantamweight category in Bangkok.
Asian Games boxing gold medalist Dinko Singh passed away on Thursday after a prolonged battle with liver cancer. He was 42 years old. Dinko Singh's biggest achievement was winning the gold medal at the Bangkok Asian Games in 1998. His performance had a tremendous impact on the Indian boxing world. MC Mary Kom, a 6-time world champion, stepped into the field of boxing after watching Dinko Singh. Apart from Mary Kom, many boxers from the Northeast jumped in the ring, inspired by the exploits of Dinko Singh. Prime Minister Narendra Modi also condoled the demise of the celebrated boxer. PM tweeted, Shri Dinko Singh was a sporting superstar, an outstanding boxer who earned several laurels and also contributed to furthering the popularity of boxing. Saddened by his passing away, condolences to his family and admirers. Om Shanti. Dinko first caught attention of everyone in 1989 at the National Sub-Junior Tournament at Ambala, where he became the national champion. Thereafter, Dinko Singh never looked back and continued to leave his mark at many global tournaments in the bantamweight category. He will forever remain a torchbearer of the Indian boxing, a sportsperson who inspired many to believe in their potential and deliver. Sports Desk, DD India.
Let's now scan some international developments. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on Wednesday issued a directive initiating several major Department of Defense-wide efforts to address security challenges posed by China as the U.S. #1 pacing challenge. According to a statement by Department of Defense, these initiatives, some of which will remain classified, are designed to focus on departmental processes and procedures to better help the department leaders contribute to the whole of government efforts to address the challenge from China. Initiatives will complement the multifaceted work on China policy of departments, agencies and the White House. According to the statement, many initiatives are intended to streamline, strengthen cooperation with U.S. allies and partners, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. The Myanmar junta has hit deposed civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi with corruption charges over claims that she accepted illegal payments of gold and more than $500,000 in cash. The state media has reported the country has been in turmoil since the generals ousted Suu Kyi on February 1st, with nearly 850 civilians killed in a brutal crackdown by the security forces on near-daily protest against the coup. 75-year-old Nobel laureate, who has been in custody since the coup, is facing a raft of wide-ranging criminal charges, including sedition and breaching a colonial-era secrecy law. The latest charges relate to allegations by former Yangon region chief minister that Suu Kyi illegally accepted some $600,000 in cash from him, along with around 11 kilograms of gold. French President Emmanuel Macron has called for fair taxation of digital giants ahead of meeting with newly appointed Chief of Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in Paris. The group of 7 powers, that includes France, had agreed on Saturday to support a minimum rate of at least 15% in talks underway at the OECD, based on rewriting the rules of cross-border taxation among 139 countries. Macron said They wish for a swift and ambitious conclusion to the negotiations. Meanwhile, OECD Secretary General Matthias Cormann has said that post-COVID-19 economic recovery remains the global priority at the moment. France is willing to contribute efforts towards a lasting peace between Israel and Palestinians. President Emmanuel Macron told US-based Jewish advocacy group that recent events demonstrate the necessity for a decisive boost to negotiation to establish fair and long-lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians. In May, tensions in Jerusalem led Hamas to fire rockets towards the holy city. Israel responded with airstrikes, and the most serious cross-border fighting with Hamas in years reached for about 11 days before a fragile ceasefire was reached. During the fighting last month, Macron spoke to both Israeli and Palestinian leaders and said that he worked with Egypt and Jordan on the ceasefire. In Spain, nightlife reopening has once again come to a halt after being announced just a week back. Spain's health ministry scrapped a nationwide plan to gradually reopen nightlife and clubs following widespread complaints from regional authorities. The plan, which would have allowed areas with low infection rates of COVID to open nightclubs until 3 a.m., drew the wrath of several regions in a legal challenge from Madrid's conservative leader Isabel Díaz Ayuso. Since the nationwide state of emergency expired a month ago, restrictions on travel and business have eased. Transmission has fallen steadily as vaccination rates have picked up. Meanwhile, health chiefs from Spain's 17 regions unanimously approved a revised version of the document in which the rules are reduced to non-binding guidelines. Currently, Spain stands 11th in the global COVID tally with over 37,15,000 cases of the virus, and the deaths casualty toll passed the 80,000 mark. Argentina's President Alberto Fernandez and Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez said that they support waiving patent protection on COVID-19 vaccines. The move will allow a rapid distribution of jabs in the poorest countries. Spanish Prime Minister visited Buenos Aires to help strengthen economic and political ties with South American country. Fernandez thanked Sánchez for Spain's support to Argentina in the debt negotiation with the International Monetary Fund. Spain and Argentina signed agreements related to management of the pandemic and defense of human rights. Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has urged Islamic scholars, teachers, political leaders and activists to make efforts to keep youth away from destructive path of militancy and terrorism. Inaugurating 50 model mosque through video conferencing from a residence in Dhaka, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina said militancy is damaging the image of Islam across the world. Denouncing terrorism and militancy, Sheikh Hasina said that nobody goes to heaven by killing people. Bangladesh has embarked upon a plan to construct over 500 model mosques across the country at a cost of over 8,000 crore takas, with various facilities for religious activity, research, education, libraries, among other facilities. A Russian court has outlawed groups linked to jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny after declaring them extremist. The move that bans his allies from elections will further strain US-Russia ties before a closely watched summit. Wednesday's ruling has delivered a final hammer blow to a vast political network that Navalny built up over many years to try to challenge veteran Russian leaders' grip on power. Spokesperson for Moscow prosecutor's office said that he was pleased with the ruling that recognized illegal street rallies led by Navalny's allies. The authorities now have the formal power to jail activists and freeze their bank accounts if they continue their activities. Peruvian socialist Pedro Castillo held a wafer-thin lead in a polarized presidential election on Wednesday, with a battle brewing over the result that could spark weeks of political wrangling, market volatility and deeper divisions. Castillo, who has rattled the Andean nation's political elite, had just over 50% with 99.8% of the votes, processed just a 0.4 percentage point ahead of right-wing Keiko Fujimori. Meanwhile, Fujimori has raised unsubstantiated allegations that supporters of Castillo tried to steal votes. However, leftist party has strongly denied the claim. Fujimori also plans to launch a legal battle over thousands of contested votes as the vote count nears conclusion. Meanwhile, supporters of presidential candidates Pedro Castillo and Keiko Fujimori took to the streets of Lima to demand that electoral authorities release the final results of the presidential runoff. And as we wind up this edition of Newsnight, we leave you with the visuals of the Ring of Fire, the first solar eclipse of this year. Several countries got to experience the celestial phenomenon as on Thursday as they witnessed the solar eclipse lighting up the skies in the northern hemisphere. Canada saw a partial solar eclipse, creating a spectacular crescent which rose to the night sky and painted the sky red. As per NASA, solar eclipse was visible in India but only from Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh. Other countries experienced Ring of Fire or annular solar eclipse, where the moon moves entirely over the sun but does not block out its light, leaving a thin ring of brilliance. Take a look how. Namaskar.